Good to see you again, and I look forward to exploring our time together. As you know, this is the second talk in the Dhamma Map series, Dhamma Map 2. And perhaps you know the story of the handful of leaves. You know, Buddha reaches down into the forest floor and picks up a handful of leaves and says, "Are there more leaves in my hand, monks, or more leaves here in the entire forest?" Well, like a lot of answers to those kinds of questions, it was pretty obvious, but they answered anyway. You know, there's more leaves in the forest. Well, so what I know and understand is like all the leaves in the forest. What I'm teaching in this Dhamma is like the leaves in my hand. Still, there are a lot of leaves in that hand, I guess. Certainly, it's been most of my life trying to, ascertain what's there and let it into my life. And now, in talking about taking the whole picture, really, it's just it's a few of the leaves, but what matters is the whole picture. And we're going to be focusing on the origin of suffering, but really we're dealing with the entire map and just moving through it in a way where certain things are attended to. But at all times, we want to be able to let go of any map, any resting in concept, and let it, the vastness of not only the teachings, but the vastness of our humanity, of this human experience. Because this map and all of these, the origin of suffering, it's all empty. And the suffering is empty. When there's no hunger, when there's no grasping, there's no suffering. So that's why the whole of it is always present for us. And so these, Four Noble Truths that provide sort of a general orienting, with us focusing right now on the second Noble Truth, or shall I say, taking that as an orienting point. Remember that the path runs through the entire thing. And so our attempt now is to get a sense of the path as a living sense. If we approach it as technicians, we'll only get a technician's understanding. This is really working with this life, this very human life, where there is real pain, real joy, the sense of texture as we, feel ourselves sitting in our chairs. So when we begin with this, remembering this orienting teaching of dependent origination, if you understand Paticca Samuppada, if you understand dependent origination, if you see it, you see the Dhamma, you see me. That was the teaching around this. And the aspect that we'll be kind of branching out from where now is this area of thirst and clinging and becoming or identity, because those teachings, these teachings, even these few leaves from the handful of leaves, branch out not only in ways that are vast, but also really explanatory, but only if we let it touch us. And the touching us is oriented in this part of Paticca Samuppada, where this contact with the world, this intimate contact with the world that I'll keep reminding you about, is crucial for understanding the Dhamma, because this is the texture, this is the hearing and the seeing and the smelling, this is the emotional life, this is the sensual life. So it's really letting it touch us. And the second noble truth, as you know, is very straightforward. This origination of dukkha, the hunger. So this focus on tanha, the hunger that makes for further becoming, accompanied by passion and delight, relishing now here and there, now there, and then specifies the hunger for sensual pleasure. So relishing, passion around that, hunger for becoming, the relishing and passion for becoming, and the relishing and the passion for non-becoming. And all of these are really, to be experienced in some reality, some depth. So the hunger, there's gratification for it, right? And the danger, the passion and delight is some gratification right there, but the danger that we fall in. Mindfulness leaves, tranquility leaves, greed can come up for more of it, hatred for those who deny us. I mean, this is where we fall in. That doesn't mean that there can't be pleasure. Of course, there's still going to be pleasure, just as there will always be pain. But this connection between the gratification and the danger is apparent to us right here. And the key, of course, is that the thirst, the tanha, is to be abandoned. And as always, we're talking not just about a project that can be taken as an individual working on their own without any impact in the world. It has to do with all humans flourishing, all of our relationships and the society we live in and how we participate in. It's all part of this thirst and the ending of thirst. And they're both here, right? So if we really get a sense of this origin, only then can we really make sense of the cessation. So I implore you to be curious over this next, minutes that we're together. What is this that we're talking about? And, in the first talk, we went through dependent origination generally, and we talked about that consciousness, name and form, nama rupa, the vortex, where consciousness gives birth to, is the conditions for the arising of name and form, the conditions for the arising of consciousness. So this feeling sense of being here now is always in this body-mind loop that is being driven by tanha. Right? So this is a kind of a summary of the press that all of us feel. Maybe you feel that press now of just, what do I have to do later today? Am I loved? What am I responsible for? Will climate change destroy the world for my children and my children's children? It's all here. And given the intensity of this being enwrapped, ensconced, kind of pulled into this, how powerful does this path have to be to bring the insight and compassion, the social harmony? How powerful does the path have to be to bring about some cessation, some freedom? That's why we say the path is running through all of this. We can't talk about the origin of dukkha without talking about the path, because that is the path, that understanding that allows release, that sees the emptiness, that sees that it's not necessary and that there are alternatives. So the tanha, the thirst that was talked about in the second noble truth, passion and delight, now here, now there, the relishing, the wanting, the thirsting for the sensual pleasures, for the becoming, for the non-becoming. And we can unpack that, right? This is our looking at the origin and the path right now. So we touch into this 6 sense doors, the 5 physical sense doors in the mind. And there's this intimacy that we talked about with the world, but do we really feel the biological roots? Do we really sense that we're juicy creatures? That running through our veins is this really automated chemical processes set in motion with each contact with sight and sound with another person, that there's hormones that are flowing, that there's all the nerve endings at the tip of our fingers that feel the pinprick of life, the heart, the pinpricks in the heart. And that these hungers, they're deeply conditioned in us, right? I mean, they have a purpose, right? It's survive. The organism has got to survive. So, we can't distance ourselves from this and expect the Dhamma to be alive and to offer its gifts of freedom. So I just want to really invite that sense of immediacy around the teachings. In this tanha, this kama tanha, this hunger for pleasure, is built also the wish for the ending of pain, because the ending of pain is pleasurable and ending of the pleasure is painful. And that is how we're led through our lives, by that, right? Going here, now there for social pleasure, relational pleasure, for sensual pleasures. All of these things drive us, but that drive includes keep me away from the pain, because that's the closest I can get to pleasure. And that urging, being interpersonal and social, enjoys, if you will, or partakes of the complexity of our social lives, because everyone we meet is likewise in this human situation of having neural networks and hormones, but basically experientially, which is the Buddha's viewpoint, is phenomenological, experiential. There's the urgings that all of us feel, and we get together and we have these systems of urging. So included in this hunger for sensual pleasure is feelings of loneliness, emptiness, alienation. And that is really rooted in a fear of death, that my being ostracized. And of course, in prior times was death. To be ostracized from the tribe was basically death, because we can't survive alone. And emotionally, we can't survive alone. And the organism knows this. And so pain, social, relational pain, has a purpose. It keeps us alive, as well as leading to a point of possible thriving and flourishing, not just because we have the social contact, but because of the great gifts of love and compassion that come with social contact. But also there's the mutual stimulation and attraction that comes from this drive for the social pleasure. It's like a dance where I entertain you, I satisfy you, you satisfy me, and we kind of have these unspoken, unwritten contracts of mutual stimulation. But it's a dance, we're whistling in the dark. And really, when we're hungry, we see each other as food. the irony there is that in doing so, we actually increase the isolation and alienation. We separate ourselves by making the other the object of our seeking, of our pleasure, which is a very different, you see, now understand, we're still talking about tanha here. So tanha sets this up, but the cessation of tanha, how is it to be with another available and open and not having the relationship driven by these mutual hunger and fear of pain? And of course, when we can't fill those desires, those social desires with people, we fill them with food and alcohol and purchases and work and all kinds of media stimulation. So the picture is not at all alien for any of us. I mean, look at the business built up by Amazon around the hunger for pleasure. I will purchase this, I will purchase that. Eventually, I got to stop running out of things to purchase, right? No, that's why they do so well. Make it easy to satisfy the hunger for sensual pleasure and to keep away the pain, to have something else we can buy that'll keep the pain away. But the hole in the middle can't be filled, ever. There's no self in the middle to be filled. It's just the dynamics of wanting. That's the tanha. And I really want to emphasize, this is why the path is so beautiful, and why the samvega, the sense of passion about the path, the sense of really hair on fire, is because the being locked in this way in tanha isn't necessary. It's could be recognized as not operating, and then we gradually live into that capacity, that understanding, if we can experience it. We can not just take it in as an idea. So the path is right here, right here. And of course, that brings us to the danger, right? That if we stay in this system, this is what we call hell, you know. This is not necessary. But the danger is that we just don't see it, and we follow it in. We follow those delights in. But cessation is possible, right? And the unbinding is possible. The unbinding in our relationships is possible when we're not driven by the hunger for pleasure, but when something else lets go and we're available to it. It's a radically altered way to live. So that's why we do this Dhamma Map stuff. Right? There's a purpose here. Purpose is practice. The purpose is how we live, not practice as an abstraction, something sitting on a cushion. As you'll see when we get to the fourth talk, and hopefully before then even, this path is always on. This is it. This is it. Which brings us to the second urging, the hunger for becoming, the thirst for becoming. And obviously this includes bodily survival. I want to continue becoming, and the fear of death again. And whatever I can do to protect not only the physical body, but this construct that I've managed to build up of me, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. How do I protect it? And so I'm constantly searching for those protections. What will satisfy and stabilize a sense of I am when we know at the center it's impermanent and empty, as we've been talking about, right? But anything we can do to get attention, we will do. Oh, okay, you see me? Great. I'm here. I'm good. But it's pretty fragile, pretty temporary. But rather than be invisible, rather than touch the emptiness at the core, we seek to find ways to buttress this sense of me. We'll get attention any way we can. And the attention, by the way, is pleasurable, right? I mean, we have this mix of the kama tanha and the bhava tanha, the hunger for pleasure and the hunger for becoming, right mixed up because, hey, it feels great when everybody says how wonderful I am and everybody's looking at me and I can stabilize this self in your eyes. Now, part of that is going to happen, that kind of mutual stabilizing, simply because of how the organism, the psychobiological organism works. But does it have to be driven by tanha? So we want to distinguish again that this keeping the body-mind occupied with each other, entertaining each other into existence, is very different tone. It's a very tense thing, rather than the resting without tanha in the flow of loving kindness, in the natural compassion of the mind, in the kind of the mutuality, like the mother's love. Yes, the infant has an urging, a hunger for that, but as the self rigidifies into the adult I am, and there's tension to maintain that and to constantly feed it, because we haven't found that place that is content without that constant input that will stabilize me. So what do? As we grow up, we create strategies for being seen. My appearances, that, whether it's a beautiful body or my hair or the car I drive or anything to do to be seen in that physical way, but also my accomplishments. Power, obviously, is a good one there. And we're always doing this for each other, right? You're seeing me, I'm seeing you, and it's not just you and I as individuals, but the social constructs that are built around that as well. So my group helps me be seen. I see others in my group. And then, of course, you have the danger, people outside my group. Not only do I not see them, maybe I hate them. And I further strengthen and stabilize my sense of self in hatred. You see that connection? So I am one who hates immigrants, or I am one who hates Jews, or something like that. And it's the pleasure of having partnership in that. So there's pleasure, and the identity, stabilizing an identity that is empty and can't find anywhere else to get stable. So it stabilizes in hatred. And of course, we also stabilize in the good. We stabilize with groups of people, let's say our co-meditation friends. And the orienting, the sort of the moving, the aiming of that energy of tanha towards something genuinely wholesome is where it inclines itself towards freedom rather than towards greater suffering. But eventually the tanha is to be abandoned, yeah? And the pleasure and the survival are enmeshed, as we just talked about. And we can really see that in this great trio of sex, money, and power. Pleasure in sex, pleasure in money, pleasure in power, self-making in sex, self-making in money, and self-making in power. It's all laid out right there. And in this becoming, just as we had Facebook at the heart, just as we had Amazon at the heart of the hunger for pleasure, we have Facebook at the heart of the hunger for becoming. We are all in this feeding frenzy of I am, you are, you make me, I make you, and you make your connections and you satisfy yourself, not to mention keeping yourself into the stream of, stimulation and so on. Which brings us to the hunger for escape. Because of this intense sensitivity, we cannot take what life is giving us. Let me out. And we feel the allure of oblivion, the wish to get out. We're recoiling from the hurt, from the overwhelm, and it's just too much. So remember the sea turtle? And that's like where the salt water touches the eyes and the water touches the body. This is us in the environment. Every moment of our lives, like now you hear the sound of my voice, or you feel your body in the chair, or you feel the just sort of the functioning of the whole of the body, the sensitivity of the body. This is it, right? And I mean, just think of the poor nervous system that has to cope with this. Oh, no wonder we urge to get out. But if it were just the physical sensitivities, piece of cake. Consider the sensitivities that arise due to our conditioning from our families, our backgrounds in trauma or in neglect, the social forces around us, and the stressors and the toxins in the environment. Sometimes it's just too much. Let me out. So there are strategies for that, driven by fear of losing whatever safety we have, but also driven by our fear of intimacy, our fear of being seen, our fear of social vulnerability. And this is for all of us. Even the raging narcissist fears being seen. And what the narcissist is wanting is to have the persona seen, but not the heart. So we're all like that. We're all doing that. And when the Buddha speaks about the cessation of tanha, here we are. But we keep driving forward with our strategies, our substance addictions to escape, our social withdrawal, but also how we don't express our gifts, right? We keep a cover over our beauty. We cut ourselves out with shame and self-doubt. We escape in meditation. We escape in media and all kinds of other ways, religion or whatever, and just routines, So we give power over to people and institutions and cults because they provide the illusion of protection that we can't provide. And the need for the protection is driven by tanha. So we build a life where, we can protect ourselves with all kinds of social strategies, not just internal psychological strategies. And the suicide wish, the internal hurting of ourselves and holding ourselves down, the mental self-harm is all part of this picture of vibhava tanha. So the overall picture of this driving, of this teaching that is part of the second noble truth, but that illuminates the entire path, is that it keeps us off balance, trying to fill the hole. And we have the actual experiences associated with that, frantic and aggressive and sometimes really sad, sometimes bubbling and agitated with it, but it's always painful. It's always painful. And the push of greed, hatred, and delusion. Right. And there's something I want to say about that greed, hatred, and delusion is the moment by moment response to the world that we can observe, driven by the underlying tanha, the underlying thirst, right? We'll talk more about that in a minute, but I just really want to make it clear that greed, hatred, and delusion are so important because they are like the active forces. And you see the greed, hatred, and delusion manifesting socially, no problem, right? You can see greed functioning in our political system, in our business system, economic system generally, and it's not a subtle thing, and it irradiates this life. But what's irradiated? What's being irradiated? It's simply the khandhas, right? So this is the experiential description the Buddha offered. And we talked about this before, but it's important to understand that this also relates to our understanding the origin of suffering, not just the fact of suffering. So the constant, you might say, burn or push, and it's coming through these six sense spaces, contact and feeling that we talked about. This sensitivity is the doorway. It's our contact with the world, right? And it's an animal thing. It's just happening. I mean, we're just like, we are both of these squirrels, right? We are, this watermelon is so good, and we have our face buried in the watermelon. And meanwhile, this other guy's like, hey, I want that. And this guy doesn't even know he's about to be attacked. And we're kind of in that, and it's all irradiated by tanha. And our crowd behavior is irradiated by tanha. The whole movement of our society coming from fear and desire. And it doesn't have to be this way. Freedom is possible here, socially, as well as relationally, interpersonally, and internally, of course. So what does this mean to our path? This sensitivity. This is the kind of the schematic of it, right? The feeling comes in, and so thirst arises, and the thirst generates the clinging, and we try to freeze the world. So if we can get a sense of this push of being in the world, intimate with the world, constant, pleasant and unpleasant, neutral feelings coming up, constant, conditioned, and this basic urges of tanha, of thirst, and all the complexity of this, the greed, hatred, and delusion. Why is ethics so important? Because it's being driven by this, right? This is the countervailing force for the good, for harmony, that sets the conditions. You cannot do the deeper work without the ethics, because the whole system is still being selflessly pressed and manipulated by the thirst and the clinging. So we have the khandhas, and just to recap, the rupa, the experience of there being materiality, of there being a physical form, and what is touching is received as pleasant, unpleasant, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So that's that lens of our experience, is the feeling lens. The perception lens of experience. So objects are recognized. We'll talk about that again in a minute. The constructions, all the emotions, the memories, and so on, and the consciousness, the knowing, experiencing, cognizing of it. But this is where we need to go a little bit deeper towards how this is functioning interpersonally and ultimately socially. So when what is seen is another person, then a whole series of specific reactions are set in motion. So there's specialized relational structures in the body-mind that are invoked when you see someone's eyes, when you see their face, when you hear their voice. Deeply, deeply conditioned. And the entire relational history conditions the arising consciousness. If you remember from dependent origination, Sankara Pachaya Vijnana, depending upon the formations that have already been set in motion, consciousness arises. So that, all of our prior contacts are invoked and stimulated. This whole experience is now vibrating with another person. But it's not even that simple, because it's going both ways. And if if we remember how sensitive we are as human beings, that this bi-directional aggregate to aggregate, process to process movement creates a locus of a process that we call relationship. And that relationship is vibrating in this way. Consciousness to consciousness, right? And my consciousness takes rise dependent upon all of my constructs, so does yours. And the contact, feeling, and perception that arise dependent upon this consciousness, as we talked about some at the last talk. And so the whole experience of reality is conditioned by all my prior mental, bodily formations, right? Likewise, these constructions are impacting each other reciprocally. And the perceptions and language that provides this pathway that moves between us, mind-to-mind contact through language, but also the proliferation through society, as we did mention, but there's an amplification process that happens where, as many of us have experienced in insight dialogue, when we're with another, that the seeing and being seen and hearing and exploration of the Dhamma takes that relational and social feedback loop and the amplification that's happening of the intensity of, let's call it a relational energy or vibration, is being applied to mindfulness, to understanding Dhamma as a felt experience, right? But the same power is applied to when we recognize differences in each other and all the different features, to othering, to creation of subgroups, in-groups, out-groups, and our social ills that come from that are likewise impelled by tanha. And one being and another being and two beings together and many beings together are all in this searching for pleasure, avoiding pain, and turning off when it's neither pleasurable nor painful. And we're interacting in a world that we perceive to be physically real. We feel a body, we project a reality to the other person's body, and then there's our our sort of real world experience of these khandhas, which takes us to the next step. It's not just khandhas, it's upadana khandhas, right? Clinging aggregates. The clinging aggregates, they cling and they are what's clung to. So we're going to see what that looks like, but I just want to take a moment and let you kind of absorb where we are, because it's moving quickly to get this overview, this sense of a big picture. So the humanity in us that knows in our hearts these urges, letting that settle for a moment, because that's what's driving the clinging. So, talk about clinging. And I've often likened it to a robot arm, right? That's just grabbing onto experience. And words we use like clinging and grasping, gripping, the gripping of the world. And we freeze the world in time. We try to freeze circumstances. That's all clinging. And sustaining through time, sustaining an experience when it's all flux, not just at the quantum and molecular level, but I mean, moment by moment, the mental experience, the bodily experience is all flux. And through upadana, through clinging, we hold it, we sustain it. And that's where we get a sense of permanence. You understand? We grasp and create the sense of permanence, which gives rise to a sense of self and world, past and future. And it's driven, the energy that drives this system is tanha, yeah? And there's our danger. We fall into the system and keep at it. And where we aim our grasping is intention, wholesome intentions, unwholesome intentions. It can go both ways and still be clinging. So what do we cling to? The usual stuff. Yeah, whether it's some beautiful person or some idea of how it could be for us, or some sexual thing, or how we might be, or what we might want. Obviously, all these sensual pleasures, but also views, not only our wishing for power, but our views about other people who cling to power, or other people who do good things. And we hold on to those views as well, of that can be wrong view sometimes, right? Wrong view exists, doesn't it? And there's also, of course, right view, but there can be clinging. And we cling to forms and so on. Oh, my dogs. I don't cling. Oh, wait a minute. That's a latte that I made, a matcha latte. Maybe I was clinging. Oh, wait a minute. Really, none of us is exempt, apparently. So you can reflect on your own clinging, and that's a practice, right? So practice runs through all of this. And the Buddha spoke about 4 clingings, if you will, to sensual pleasures and views and precepts and observances, to a belief in itself. They're all, every one of them, simply attempts to stabilize the world, to control it, to get things the way you want. So whether it's the sensual pleasures or the views, precepts and observances, sort of giving power over to something else, is what that sometimes comes as, to a belief in the self. But there's problems with this, because nothing lasts. And the clinging makes us unhappy. We can't control the world. And the clinging breeds greed, hatred, and delusion. And we act on that. And there's the danger. Our clinging creates suffering for us and puts us at the locus of creating suffering for others. And we proliferate from them, right? All these ideas, all these things, all these experiences, all these thoughts, all these reactions. And the body-mind just spins off. And this teaching on papancha, on proliferation, is a way of naming that so that we can understand it and maybe not be controlled by it. So all of these words really are just connecting tanha, the thirst, and the clinging, with greed, hatred, and delusion, to make it clear that a hunger can create not only that we're hungry for the pleasure, but we also cling to our hatred from someone about someone who takes away our pleasure. And the hunger for becoming, not only is there greed for the situations that will aggrandize me, but hatred for those who criticize or threaten us, right? And likewise for escape. So the key here is that we cling not only in greed, but we cling in hatred. And that action follows this. That's the important thing. This matters. This understanding, if we really take it in and practice with it, observe it in our lives, make it path, not abstract Dhamma, that's the key. Because all this clinging builds a self, bhava, becoming. I am that hunger. I feel it. My mind is obsessed. It's me. And it's a physical thing. It's a hormonal thing. And I'm squinting and I have to get these pleasures and be protected. My views are right. Your views are wrong. I am the one who fears aging, illness, and death. But really, consider, what is the suffering that comes with illness or deep loss? Is it out there? Is it that thing? Or is it I am suffering? And we suffer together. Again, remember that this is the origin aspect of suffering, pointing to the cessation. So to the extent that we are annexing, grabbing onto others to stabilize ourselves, to make them an extension of ourselves, and to make our professions and our social groups, our religions an extension or a part of, I identify with that. The we becomes me. And the tighter this grip is, even the social grip, the paradox is that the tighter the grip, the greater the alienation, the greater the feeling of separation, even as we grasp onto other people. It's quite a tender thing. So we have this wonderful summary that the Buddha provided in the form of the asava, which summarizes both the imprisonment and the freedom. I refer to this as the tripod of suffering. You might recognize it as intoxicants or floods or taints is often used in some certain translations. And they overtake the body mind, right? We are intoxicated, we are flooded, and we remain stewing in this kind of rather messy, trapped human situation from which we could be free any moment, but we don't know that, right? And we get stuck, and we get stuck together in our relational suffering, and as a society, we get stuck by the ways we reinforce it together. So when we talk about awakening and freedom, it covers all levels of the human system. And so this is a deeply important teaching, because the arising of these floods is the arising of the world. This is the arising of grasping at and being ignorant of it, all rolled into one ball. The cessation of the asava is the cessation of becoming of the world, the cessation of the suffering. So the cessation of the asava is synonymous with awakening. So as we talk about for a moment the asava, keep that in mind. It's a profound and central teaching in the Dhamma that reaches out into everything we've been talking about so far. And so this tripod, stability, right? 3 legs, nice and stable. Ignorance. Well, we've talked about ignorance already, but just to recap, we don't know this is all happening. Everything that we're doing together today is a practice of right view, which goes counter to ignorance, to see what the human situation is, right? That's what this Dhamma map, what the Dhamma is about. So ignorance is not knowing the Four Noble Truths. It's not knowing impermanence. It's being this blindness to the human situation, to the situation of sentience and what drives us. That's one leg of the tripod. Another is sensory lust, and you already have the feeling for how that drives us, right? And the third piece you're also familiar with, becoming. So how these 3 work together is really important. This is the key. That ignorance supports the continuation of sensory lust, because we think we're going to get it satisfied. We think we can control the world, that we can get what we want. We don't know it's impermanent. We think it will satisfy us, so we're just going to give it our all. Ignorance also supports becoming, because we don't see the emptiness of self. We keep longing to fill up. We don't know that the release of the longing will bring actual profound joy, availability to life, love, compassion. We don't know that. So we keep being driven by the becoming. But the sensory lust also keeps the ignorance in place by keeping us stressed, pushing, off balance. The becoming, keeping us off balance, and the mind so agitated with its self project that we can't see clearly. They support each other, right? This is the stability of the tripod. And the becoming supports the lust, because I am the one that's going to get satisfied. I'm the one that's going to avoid pain. And the pleasure, sensory lust, supports the becoming, because the pleasure of becoming, and avoid the pain of invisibility. So these asava were referred to as the Buddha referred to them as the originating in ignorance, even though it contains ignorance, you might. So it's quite a deep level of ignorance we're talking about. He referred to it also as the root of all disturbances. And to see it, you need more than jhana, more than deep immersion and concentration of mind. He referred to faith, virtue, learning, generosity, and wisdom. And that's our path, right? So seeing the arising and the cessation of the khandha, when you see that the form and the consciousness and the feelings, perceptions are arising and vanishing all the time, the intoxicants no longer flow. What a beautiful thing. So we can see how this points to freedom from intoxication and a workable path to what you might call detox. So you have the asava, which I hope you can feel, this nut, this condensation of the problem, you might say. And what is the antidote for each? Well, for ignorance, of course, wisdom, practicing right view, mindfulness all the time in your life to see through this tangle. Sensual lust, relinquishment, and becoming, effacement or the erosion of the self. And how do you bring this about? Because this is the purpose and the operation of the Noble Eightfold Path. This tells us why the path is what it is, and to some extent, how it works. It's an 8-step detox program, and we can take part in it at any time. But what gets intoxicated? It's empty, right? It's nothing other than the clinging aggregates that get intoxicated. There's nothing there. There's no there. So in closing, we have some of the things that we talked about today, and let's see how they connect. The ignorance, of course, where's those asava? Right there, right? The constructing, the sankhara, constructions are there. And of course, the self is construction. And the consciousness, here's the aggregate of consciousness. And we know that the consciousness is the basis, as you'll see in just a moment, for perception and feeling and so on. The nama rupa, the rupa is over here. And the 6 sense bases, we have both the rupa, but it's contact. So contact is connected with consciousness right there. And feeling right here is at the basis of the pleasure. And this thirst, well, it's all over the place, isn't it? The origin. And thirst is also what's driving the clinging aggregates. And of course, it's the clinging aggregates. So there's the clinging. And the becoming, the bhava, we're talking about the self-becoming, individually, personally, socially, and the becoming also over here, sensual lust also right there. And let's also look at feeling right here, right? Both directions, of course. And the suffering that is coming up is right here. Cessation, of course, when we go this direction, we have cessation. We go this direction, we have the suffering, which always is rooted in the ignorance. And the greed, hatred, and delusion are being driven by the tanha. Where's the tanha? Let's see. Being driven by the tanha. And the detox, the wisdom, is, where's the asava? There we go, is connected to the ignorance. The relinquishment is connected to the sensual lust. The effacement is connected to the becoming. And the greed, of course, is being driven by the feeling and the thirst. And so is the hatred and delusion. And perception, of course, allows, especially, remember its role between perception and constructions in our forming of the group and sensual aspect. And the clinging, remember we have all these 4 types of clinging as well. And all of this, especially powerful, impermanent, suffering, and non-self. The aggregates. That's a practice, right? And so this whole system is our gratification, danger, and escape. This entire system is doing that. And of course, we don't know it. So let's connect the delusion and the ignorance. Ignorance is this overarching pattern of ignorance. and delusion, the moment to moment. And the way that we can best understand this is to realize that we're seeing these patterns. We're feeling the flow, the whole. And it's all pointing to cessation. It's all pointing to that there is an emptiness here that we don't have to believe in. That there's a potential for freedom that runs through the entire tangle. But it also, I hope, gives you a sense of why the path is what it is something that invites appreciation and respect and I would say inspiration, really. And that our capacity to do this, to engage with this as real human beings is perhaps greater than we know and is magnificently amplified when we see the relational side of the suffering and the hunger and the relational side of freedom and path as well. So that we have this, it's much more than mutual support, because that just seems to imply a kind of a little bit of emotional comforting or something. It's actually a powerful amplifying process. That's why Sangha has been called the whole of the holy life. So here's another installment, you might say, on the Dhamma Map. And I'm very happy for us to talk about it together as and when you feel inspired to do so. Any questions or anything like that, just remember that you can unmute and step forward. Thank you. I am acutely aware of how much material that we're covering, and the letting it kind of infuse you is part of that, letting it saturate you, calls to mind right now being in a zendo where you're pretty much forced to meditate until your body is falling apart, and that something will break because you can't hold on to the little pieces anymore.
I have a question.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, a lot of my conditioning is a lot of like physical objectification, like not unlike a lot of women. So, it took me many years to find out, at on the relative plane anyway, that my worth is more than my looks. It took a long time. So I still sometimes struggle though with I'm so embarrassed, but I know I'm among friends, like bad haircuts. I know you mentioned something about looks.
Sure.
So to use what we're learning today with that and to not, practice not non-self and all of this, I can see the arising of it all and the not liking. But what's true is that I feel more confident in my profession when I feel comfortable with the way I look. So it's really, but my whole life has been with bad haircuts. So I feel like that's my learning. The universe is constantly giving me this because I need to get over it. So
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's just we all have our version of that. You're absolutely not alone. We all, for some people it's going to be body image, right? And for some people it's going to be how they appear intelligent, or even how they appear as like great meditators or nice people or something. And for all of us, it's a fragile thing, isn't it? There's always the risk it will be shattered. And I find that very tenderizing, knowing that. And what I'm hearing that feels so hopeful in what you just said was a sense of possibility. Yes, I see that there's this, if we put it in the language of the Dhamma, this hunger for becoming, this bhava tanha. Look at me and see me a certain way, and the press of that, and then the clinging we talked about, right? Clinging to how I am seen in that moment, and now I'm not, and the thoughts get caught up, and the body gets all involved in the emotional response, and we grasp onto that, and then we feel a certain way, and that tension and that grasping is me. That's an I am. And then that's the prison, that's the birth each moment of suffering, right? But inherent in that, recognizing that is exactly the recognition that it doesn't have to be like that. That's what I heard in what you said. So I find it quite hopeful and sweet that we all have our way of doing it.
Greg.
I have a question. You mentioned that at some point you redirect your tanha and then you leave it altogether. So say initially you have a sense of tanha and you're redirecting it from, say, greed towards doing inner work. And then over time, you want to leave it behind. Because I assume there must be something that is driving you right today. Or why would you continue to be on the path, for instance? So how does one work with that? Because it can often be that, oh, maybe I need to sort of just consume a lot of techniques and learn a lot of things to sort of break free from the pattern of the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, I'm actually feeding that loop altogether.
Right.
So that was the one question. And the second question was around the love for attention, which was very interesting. So, your sense of self starts becoming when you are in presence of other people. And so Facebook, you mentioned, is a great example for that. And so over the last couple of years, I personally sort of disconnected myself from Facebook and a lot of social interaction and sort of started observing the loosening of that sense of self. But then when I did some inquiry and dialogue practice, I realized that still being heard and seen feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
But then it made me think like, okay, all that work for last 2-3 years did not really help me go beyond.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really worthwhile investigating the difference between, let's say, the Facebook kind of tanha for becoming, and the pleasure of stimulation of entertainment, but also for being seen, and I want to be seen a certain way, and so on. That sense of the fragile and vain satisfactions of being seen, from when we are open to another person And there is the non-aversion, non-fear that makes availability to each other happen, right? The kind of those alienating pressures that always keep us locked up and separated have in that moment relaxed, and there we are. And there's a seeing and being seen that is a natural response. It's nature at work. It's like a plant growing in the soil, and the sun shines down, and the energy of the plant draws forth from the earth. It's more like that. And that is the natural functioning of metta, of care, friendliness, natural response of compassion, functioning. And it's not tense and driven in a hope of fulfillment, right? It's a mutual availability that has a completely different tone to it. However, as you noted in your first question, there will also be for much of our lives, until there's a release of time that's quite profound, there will be this mixture of availability, of genuine care, and of seeing and being seen that is not clinging and gripping, with the seeing and being seen that is seeking pleasure, and that is, to some extent, feeding different aspects of I am. And that mixture is okay. That's just being human. If we expect a purity, and that all of a sudden that purity goes from, perfectly bad to perfectly good, and that's what we expect the path to look like, it's going to be a kind of a tense and tenuous, unstable way of being on the path, always susceptible to the slightest mishap. But if we recognize, oh yeah, okay, cool, I have this tanha that's operating. I go to an insight dialogue retreat, or I visit a spiritual friend, and I have all the pleasures of that, and I have some self-making, and they say what a great meditator I am, and I say, oh gosh, really? Thanks, that's so sweet of you. And I was like, nice, I like that. And then we say something to them, and so there's that mutual, kind of self-creating that's going on, and then the whole group does it, like, oh, aren't we a great insight dialogue group? That's going to happen. That's just going to happen. But because it's aimed with a constant reminder of wise teachings. This is why the Dhamma is so important in insight dialogue, because you could have the meditative qualities and the power of a relationship, and if it's not aimed by the Dhamma, there's every chance that it'll just devolve into some kind of, pleasuring, mutual self-making, mutual group-making thing, and it won't be inclined towards freedom. It'll still be a nice little vacation from some of the other more gross forms of self-fabrication. But the Dhamma, when it's aiming, directing these moments, that's the sammasankappa, that's the wise intention. The intention, remember that detox program? The intention towards relinquishment and effacement, towards the release of self rather than building it up. It guides it. So now the power of that relationship goes in that direction rather than towards whatever habit drives it towards, right? Whatever habit is going to make happen. And you asked about, well, does that then, that tanha, that kind of grasping, does it create spiritual grasping? And hell yeah, it does. But it doesn't have to create the grasping and keep creating the grasping. Because as the path becomes more refined, please hear this. You become skillful at recognizing what grasping feels like. And just as you saw and felt the grasping of the gross kinds and began to let them go because you realized they weren't ever going to be satisfactory or work, it was just a bad strategy, just a habitual strategy, a socially supported strategy, but it was never going to work. Just as you saw what that grasping felt like, now the body-mind is becoming more refined. And you begin to recognize, oh, the self is, I can feel it right here. I can feel that I'm grasping onto the path. I can feel I'm grasping onto forcing myself towards understanding or, of course, the classic is grasping at pleasurable meditation experiences, either alone or with others. You begin to recognize that in your insight dialogue practice and in your silent practice. It's a beautiful phase of development where you recognize more and more subtle ways that that you're holding on. And the final release of self-concept in that is just beautifully described throughout the discourses. The Buddha speaks about this in very direct, frank ways. The fetters, the higher fetters and the lower fetters. These higher fetters, quite subtle, to release the conceit of self, is quite a beautiful human capacity, and the sense of possibility that it offers us is, a gift of these teachings. But to expect it perfection, and I can't be on the path until I'm perfect, well, that's going to hurt. It's going to hold you back. I think we've all experienced that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Greg, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling a bit confused by consciousness.
Mm.
A lot of the other things, I feel I can experience them, I can grasp them, and this consciousness, I feel like I need some more pointers to really have it mean something experientially.
I get it. It's funny because it's like there is no experience without consciousness, and so it's here. It's always here, and it's that part is like, oh, experience. There is some experience happening. It's that piece, and so it can be. Difficult to feel the water that you swim in, and what I'd like to recommend is, as a daily practice, just through your day, start looking. And you can't look without mindfulness, right? So with mindfulness, you're out of the habit of being wrapped up in all of the mental experiences, the sensory experiences, the reactions, and so on. And you have a sense of perspective that's not locked up. That's where the sati, the mindfulness, is. When there's enough mindfulness, just throw in there, just bring in that sort of like, what is that? What is the component of experience right now that is the experiencing? And just look for it and be puzzled. be interested above all. And it can be helpful if you recognize that technically vijnana, consciousness, refers to one of 6 kinds of consciousness: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, thinking. And the Buddha likened it to how you designate a fire. If a fire is burning in the forest, you call it a forest fire. If it's burning in the grass, you call it a grass fire. If it's a bunch of sticks that are burning, you call it a stick fire, you know? Well, it's like that. So there's seeing consciousness. Consciousness is arising. It's like burning on the fuel of seeing or of hearing. And it's quick. So, you know, it's, but if you actually pay attention to different senses, it's one way of getting a doorway into what is vijnana. Be patient with yourself. It might literally take years for you to feel like you can instantaneously recognize. But you see, these khandha, all 5 of them, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, they're all lenses that you can use to observe present moment experience. You can look at the perception aspect. Like as I'm looking at the image on the screen of you, I can notice the object formation. If I observe the vijnana, it's just this, that, oh, this is, you know, a sense of the continual rising and vanishing of this experiencing happening. If I look at the Vedana, the feeling tone, and I notice the pleasantness that arises as I see you, or as I see all of the other people on the screen, and so on, the other sensations that there might be pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So those lenses of the khandhas are practice that you can do all the time. That's why he taught it. He didn't teach it so we could have a study session here. This is like practice. It's all practice. And it's impermanent and it's suffering if there's clinging, because without clinging, you can observe, oh, is there no clinging? Maybe this is nibbana. Maybe this is cessation right here, right? So look for that too. And is there a self in the middle, right? That's all the khandhas are like that. So consciousness is a piece of that. It's a lens to look at experience. It's a fabrication. There's just experience. It's all just flux. But it's a very helpful teaching to observe what otherwise is kind of, wow, I can't even, you know, I mean, where do you start? So it's nice to have the touch points of these khandhas.
Great, thank you very much, Greg.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up to that, Greg, and that is consciousness in the 12 links is dependent upon the fabrications.
That's right. The constructing processes that are constantly going on are the causal conditions for the arising of vijnana. So consciousness arises with certain valences, certain energies or inclinations, right? And you know, sort of as the teaching goes, so watch the mind and its ways with care, because the whole tone of life is going to be determined by each moment that precedes it. So we live lives of love, and you know, we harvest that love. There's a beautiful Sufi, well, I guess it was Rumi that said this, don't plant barley and expect to harvest wheat. Well, maybe that's a good closing line, because it's exactly the ending time. So I'm deeply, deeply hoping that you take this into your hearts, that you ponder this, because that's the practice, that's the purpose of this, is to invite this really fully into our lives. That's why I kept saying and keep saying and will keep saying that the path runs through all of this. None of this is an abstraction. It's all about how we practice and how we live. And this kind of stuff can't become clear and fully internalized without that kind of allowing and opening, inviting it into this life. And remembering too that the wholesomeness that we develop, it's not an individual, isolated affair. It's a wholesomeness that flows from us. We glow with wisdom. We glow with compassion and care. So all of this work we dedicate to the benefit of all beings. That's what we're here doing. May all beings, including myself, including my spiritual community, but also including so many beings all over the planet, expanding the mind boundlessly throughout the universe. May all beings, without exception, benefit from our time together. May all beings be free. May there be peace. May there be peace. May there be peace. Thank you, friends. Wish you well. I really do.